Yeah. Mike, we go back a little ways. Last time I saw you was in John Day with the John Day fossil beds, remember? Okay. Well, yes. Excited to hear what you have to share. My wife and I have been to some places in Utah. Oh my, it's a wonderful exhibit for the flood. Michael Calcagno, I think I'm saying it right, rhymes with volcano. He told me that years ago. So he and his wife Michelle moved from Oregon to Arizona in 2013. I didn't realize it was that many years ago. Previously, after serving in the U.S. Navy and Oregon Army National Guard, he received a BS degree with honors from Portland State University and was an Oregon public school teacher for over 17 years. Bless you. He became a Christian in 1981 and shortly afterwards heard a radio broadcast featuring Ken Ham. Yay. Which launched his interest in creation science and biblical apologetics. He was a member of DSA for about 15 years and currently serves as president of the Arizona Origin Science Association. By the way, I get your monthly updates on your meetings, and boy, you guys are really busy down there in Arizona. It's wonderful to see that. While directing operations for the Gila and Navajo Divisions of AzOSA, Arizona Origin Science Association. His wife is a retired emergency department RN. They currently reside in Heber, Arizona. So we're really anxious to hear what you have to share today, Michael. Come on up. So let's give him a welcome.
No, I don't think I'll need that one. Let me plug this in here. Let me make one quick adjustment to the talk here because I had the intermission here scheduled a little bit earlier than I think we need to have it. So I'm going to grab that slide and pull it down a little farther because I'm supposed to go about 45 minutes, I think. And then we'll do that. All right, so let me pull it off of slide 139. We got 237 slides to go through today. Yeah, so, all right, you mentioned Bryce and Zion. And so the fact that you don't have Bryce and Zion books here today, it's okay because once we whet your appetite for it, then that gives you a month to get them in stock, right? And so then by next month, you'll be ready to go with all of that. And, well, let's see. Dr. Thomas Kindle, I know you all know who he is. And he was just my guest speaker. We had him go through Arizona here last week. He gave 6 different talks, actually the last 2 weeks. Gave 6 different presentations across our organization. And I asked him, would you like me to say hi to the DSA group when I get there? Oh, absolutely, he said. So I'm giving you his greetings. Dr. Kindle says hi. And Bruce Malone's name was mentioned also. He was my guest speaker in April of last year. And upon arriving at our house, he hadn't even made it through the back door into the bedroom before he asked if my wife and I would like to be part of his mission team to Fiji this year. And when something like that shows up at your back door, you have a really hard time saying no. And so we did that in March, and as it turned out, Bruce was supposed to be on that trip, but then he got sidetracked, delayed, diverted to Africa, to Kenya, and he wasn't able to make it. So the fact that we were there to fill in for him, it all kind of worked out. God in his timing is just wonderful in how he works things out. Even things that look like a disadvantage or a setback, he makes it all work out for good. So with the lights being as they are, I can't see all of you all there, but some of you who want to sit in the back, you're welcome to move up closer to the front if you like. This isn't going to be one of those things where you will have a quiz at the end, but don't worry about that, okay? So, and that's a picture of my wife taking a picture of the sunrise at Mesa Arch, which we'll get into just in a little bit here. let's see, I talked about that. I talked about, yeah, so I think we're pretty much good to go here. So last time I spoke here was a little over 2 years ago, and I gave a talk on, yeah, but who wrote the software? And a couple years before that, when COVID was still going on, I did a video online presentation about symbiotic relationships. But in November of 2012, shortly before we moved to Arizona, I gave a talk on the geology of the Four Corners region. And Mark said that he and his wife had planned a little trip. They did a little modification of that. And so when he asked me to, would I be able to come up and speak here today, I said, yeah, and I gave him a list of some of the talks that I had available, and I thought, I have a hunch he might just pick this talk on Utah geology. And sure enough, when he came back, he says, yeah, can you do the one on Utah? So I said, okay, that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to just make sure in case I need to do some pointing. Well, it's kind of hard to see that little red dot, but I probably won't need it anyway. All right, folks. So I titled this talk, Road Trip to Exploring Utah's National Parks and Monuments, and a few state parks also, not all of them, just a few of them, from a biblical worldview, of course. And Utah is known officially as the Beehive State. All maps and satellite images courtesy of Google Maps or Google Earth unless otherwise noted. But I refer to our neighbor to the north of us down there as the awesome geology state. I mean, so the folks who live in Utah have an incredible geological buffet in front of them. And it's kind of intriguing sometimes when I think of the people who visit there who don't bring a worldview, a biblical worldview perspective to what they're seeing. And they see these magnificent geologic features, but if not interpreted from the Bible, it's just like, wow, look what millions of years has done. It's like, no, look what a lot of water and a little bit of time has done. So I think that Utah should be called the awesome geology state. In fact, my wife and I, we're going to be going next week. We're going to be taking a little trip up to Kanab and looking around that area. But then in the summer, we're going to be going up to some of these other places. And maybe you'll see some of them today. And if you've been to Utah at any time in the past and seen some of these things, this might be a little bit of review for you. But hopefully, today I want to expand your understanding from a biblical worldview perspective so that when you're looking at it again or looking at it for the first time or talking about it, sharing about it with a friend, you can have even more confidence in knowing that what you're sharing can be backed up from a biblical and scientific point of view. So here is kind of the map of our road trip, all right? We're going to start way down there at Natural Bridges National Monument, and then follow carefully here. We're going to wend our way up and around and back down and around. We're going to hit all those spots right there, all right? So we got a lot of things to get through. We do have some audio along with this, so let's do a little quick audio video check here. How many of you recognize this, right? Video, audio, please.
Hey, what's so important? What you got here that's worth living for?
We need more audio on this, please. True love, you heard him. There's not a more noble cause than that, right? And where does true love come from? As Christians, we all know true love comes from God. And so what I want to share with you today is things that's going to point you back to God and His Word and the authority of Scripture, because that is what the Arizona Origin Science Association's primary mission is to help people build their faith in the authority of the Word of God. And by the way, we use the shorthand AzOSA, but you can call it whatever you need to call it. So, all right, by way of introduction, let's throw these things at you. Here's just a quick overview of some of the things. And so when I was here, well, let's see, it was 2 years ago, like I said. That summer, our former president, Dr. Joseph Cazell, who teaches biology at Arizona Christian University, said, you know, I've been president of this organization for 19 years, and I'm ready to hand it off to somebody else, and I would like you to consider to be my successor. And the fact that he had enough confidence in me to ask me that was kind of hard for me to say no. So when we had our December board meeting 2 years ago, he put forth me as a nomination to be his successor, and the board voted that I should assume that mantle. So the first thing I did was I had new business cards printed. The second thing I did was triple my salary. And you know what? It hasn't made any difference at all in my checking account. So here's a picture of my wife as we were visiting the Calcagno Canyon portion of Zion National Park. This is off of Interstate 15, coming up from Salt Lake from Vegas to Salt Lake City. I currently live, as was mentioned, in the town of Heber, Overgaard. It was established in 1890. We live at 6,700 feet elevation. Okay, so we are up on the first step of the Colorado Plateau. To give you an idea of where that's at, here's a map of Arizona. These little squares you see, that's where we have currently different divisions operating. So we're spread out across the state of Arizona. We had one in Flagstaff. We had to cut that one back. We had one in the town of Prescott, Prescott Valley, but we had to put that one on hold as well. But Heber, Arizona is right about there. So I live between Payson and Show Low. This is our official logo. This is our screenshot of our webpage. And my wife texted me this morning with a weather report from our hometown. That's what our front porch looked like when she got up this morning. So yeah, with a little bit of area cleared off for the bird feeders because we have several in front of our... Yeah, so I said, well, I hope you'll be able to make it down to the airport tonight because my flight leaves this evening around 9 o'clock to get back down to Phoenix and then to drive home. And so I'll be home for Easter. If everything goes well. And if not, it's been a pleasure to be here today, and I hope you all get a blessing from the presentation we have. So consider yourselves blessed to have just a little bit of rain and some sunshine because it's like I'm staring at that and go, well, we do need the moisture down there. So, all right, let's get into this now by looking at God's word. 2 Peter 3, verse 3 says this, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. And a lot of us who've been doing this for a while, we understand, oh yeah, they're talking about uniformitarian processes. And then it goes on to say, for this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water. By the word of God, it says this. Whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now by the same word, are kept in store, reserved under fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. This phrase, by the same word. So the word that tells us that there was a flood is the same word that tells us there will be a future judgment by fire. And that is one of the main reasons why people try to reject the evidence for creation and a flood, because they really don't want to have to deal with the idea that they're going to be held accountable for a future judgment. Although it is really kind of foolish to say, well, if I just pretend it never happened, then maybe the other one won't happen as well. Well, that's not being realistic, is it? Evidence for a global catastrophic flood is one of the strongest proofs that A, the Bible's account of history and God's dealings with mankind are trustworthy. B, therefore, God's promise of a coming judgment upon the earth is certain as well. And C, therefore, all mankind is accountable to the Creator and Judge, who has also provided salvation through Jesus Christ. So let's refresh ourselves on how the Bible deniers and the Bible skeptics choose to understand the geology of the earth. I found this little illustration on the website, some guy named Ray Troll, and he had a nice little colorful things where he talks about Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, and all those other names there, right? And most of you in here, probably at least a good share of you, should be familiar with who this guy here is. This is Taz Walker. He's with Creation Ministries International, Australia, and many years ago, he recorded this, Biblical Geology, Properly Understanding the Rocks. And this particular copy was produced by Creation Ministries International. However, if you were to go on their website, they don't offer it in DVD format anymore, but For $5, you can download an MP4 video. For $1.99, you can stream it, or for $4.99, you can get unlimited streaming. So I highly recommend that. It's several years old, but that will provide the basis for what we're going to go through. But I'm going to walk you through his biblical creation model as well. So this is what Taz came up with many years ago. Instead of looking at it from all these different layers over these different spans of time, he says if we just take what the Bible says and start with that, he says we can build a biblical geologic model. So during the creation week, and where is that red dot? Yeah, like I said, you're not going to be able to see it very well. But during creation week, you have just one short week of span, and yet there was a lot of geological processes. Water was there, and then the earth came out of the water, and the seas were gathered into one place, and the land appeared. And then you have the animal life, the vegetable life, then the animal life added after that. And so, a fair amount of geologic, and biologic processes going on. And then for about 1,600 years, the Bible doesn't tell us that there was anything really fundamental going on in the area of geology. We had the fall, of course, that affected some things. But from a geological perspective, God's word doesn't say that a whole lot was happening. But then comes the 1 year of the flood. And during that 1 year of the flood, and where's this little red dot? You see, we've got all kinds of geologic process going on. It starts with the eruptive phase, and that was the first 40 days. And here's where some people who just kind of, are just beginning to get acquainted with the Bible, are not really looking into this. It says, okay, 40 days and 40 nights of rain, yeah, but then it says that the whole thing lasted a year. If you go back to Genesis, it says after 40 days was how long it took for the ark to become waterborne. It says after 40 days, the ark was lifted from the earth. So that marks the time that the ark became waterborne. But the rains continued. The next 50 days, the waters are ascending and getting higher and higher. And after 60 more days of that, so a total of 150 days, you reach the zenith, or the high point. And then it says that the fountains of heaven were closed, and the fountains of the deep were closed, the windows of heaven were closed, and the water began to recede off the earth. And so the initial phase of the waters flowing off the earth was what we call the abative phase. That's where everything is coming off. And Mike Ward and others describe that as the sheet erosion. It's where now as the waters are going off the continents, as the continents are rising, it's going to be stripping off a lot of those last laid down layers, okay? And it's going to be just taking them off in big, it's like peeling, taking them off. And then eventually you get to the dispersive phase. This is where the water level gets low enough now, and it's going to start carving river canyons and channels and things like that. Eventually, the waters get off the continent. Noah has to wait for things to dry a little bit. Then you have this residual phase in the darker yellow up there. That would have been the time when the Ice Age would have occurred. And I'm sure you've all heard, well, I'm not sure that all of you have heard, okay, but I know that most of you have probably studied a little bit about this. Mike Ord talks about it a lot, about how during those first 500 years, because the oceans were much warmer, there would be a lot more evaporation coming off, and you had all this volcanic activity, creating cloud covers, making for cooler summers, and that's how the Ice Age would have happened. And the flood is the only way to explain that single Ice Age that happened. You have to have warm oceans, and you have to have cold summers, which then brings you to the modern era, the last 3,800 years after that. So when we use this as a model and we look at geologic features, then we can say, I wonder at what phase this would have happened. What would have caused this to happen here? Because sometimes, as you're driving around, you might see big plateaus that are just completely leveled off. You say, wow, it's like water just scraped that off. And then you see a mountain coming up to a point. You say, well, that must have happened after this, okay? And you can kind of put a little bit of a time frame and say, oh, well, that looks like it's a volcano. That must have been a post-flood volcano, because if it had happened earlier, it would have sheared the top off of that. Little things like that are happening, okay? So Answers in Genesis came up with this idea years ago, this little model here, talking about us wearing our biblical glasses, all right? So, in every area of study, not just in geology, but in biology, anthropology, astronomy, we're going to start with the perspective that God's Word, the Bible, is true, And therefore, if we run across anything that contradicts God's word, we can say, I'm not going to put man's opinion above God's word. I'm going to start with God's word. And if there's a contradiction, I'll wait and see. Maybe I'm going to have questions that I'll take with me to the other side of eternity. But when we get to the other side of eternity, I'm sure God will answer every single question that any of us might have. Now, for years and years, as I've been studying the Bible, I've read through Proverbs many times. I can't even remember how many times. And I read across this. And then just a couple of years ago, it suddenly jumped out at me, this verse, Proverbs 18:17. The first to plead his case seems right until another comes and examines him. And that's how it is for a lot of people. They have only heard one side of the story. If they were brought up in a public school system, they might have only gotten the millions of years, okay? And they don't know that there's another side to the story. And then when you share, there's another way to look at this. And that's where I really appreciate, like Bruce Malone in his book, he says, have you considered? Okay? Great title, because these things that we're sharing through DSA and through AzOSA, they become great conversation starters with somebody. And in fact, we've got an ongoing dialogue with our next door neighbor. And he came to one of my talks a while back. I gave a talk on ancient man. And the next time we got together, his response is, he said, how do you turn around your thinking when for so many years you've only thought one way, and now I have all this evidence that points in a different direction? I was like, wow, he's engaging with this. This is really good. And so our advice to him was, well, don't give up. Just keep pursuing. Take all the time you need. Just keep working through it. And so month by month as we meet and we discuss, it's kind of fascinating to see this guy come from he was raised in a very unfulfilling religious environment, and he turned away from all of it. And now he's realizing that I need to get back to some of it, but he has to sort out the baby from the bathwater, so to speak. And we all have that opportunity to help people with that. So let's look at that as a privilege, okay? It's maybe a bit of a challenge at times, but if God has you there, it's because he entrusts you to do it. And so I think we can all deliver that as we study to show ourselves approved, okay? So here's Utah, and here's our map. I said we were going to start down here at Natural Bridges National Monument. Now, I could have started just a little ways away from that at Gooseneck State Park, but I did talk about this 12 years ago on my talk about the Four Corners. That's where you look at this San Juan River Valley and how it just kind of meanders around like this. If you didn't know any better, you'd say, wow, it looks like it could be the Tualatin River in the desert, but the Tualatin, as you know, just kind of barely plugs along, but this one is fast moving. But we get to Natural Bridges right down here. Here's my first visit with my wife was in March, and the night before it had snowed, and somebody built a little tiny snowman on top of the sign there. So we said, okay, well, we got to pose with the snowman. And here's a map of the park. There is a little camping area there. If there's no facilities, but it's got about 12 or 15 nice flat little campsites there you can park at if you have an RV trailer or tent. And then you drive around this one-way loop, and there are 3 bridges you'll see. There are Sipapu, Kachina, and Awachamo Bridge. The first one you come to is the Sipapu Bridge. Now, it's a little bit hard to see there, but right almost smack in the middle. I'll zoom in a little closer there. You can kind of see it that way. And the last time we visited here, about a year or so ago, we noticed that they had upgraded all of the interpretive signs. Now, unfortunately, those interpretive signs still give a secular, millions of years worldview. But here's what the new ones look like, because the other ones are getting pretty faded in the sun. But here is a photo I took of that one, of the old one. And it says that these were buried, tilted, uplifted, and it says slowly exposed by meandering streams. Okay, so now stop and think of what they're saying. These are slow meandering streams. Well, it doesn't rain in that area as often as it does in Oregon. So these streams only come by once in a great while, and they don't carry that much water with them. And so to erode through all of that rock, because that would be solid rock, you would have to have millions of years. So you can kind of maybe see why they get away with that. But it says they were carried away by the overlying sediments. Now, if you were to go to their website, and this would have happened during the Permian era, they said, which was about 299 million years ago. How they can be that precise, it's anybody's guess. But on their website, they show this illustration here, and they say, here's how it used to flow, and then it cut over where the Sipapu Bridge is. So here's another view of the bridge from a little different angle, because you can hike down and get underneath it. It measures 220 feet high. Then when you get down there, it measures 268 feet wide. Unless you have a special wide-angle lens, you can't photograph the whole thing from standing below it. Now, here's a Google Earth picture, and I'm going to show you where the alleged stream came through. It came down this way and around, and then it hooked through, okay? And then it eventually breached where the bridge is now. Now, consider this, all right? Let's just suppose, let's start with their story here. We follow the stream down, it's going around, and then at some point it suddenly breaks through that rock wall and starts coming out, okay? Now, once the water has broken through the rock wall, you can kind of sort of make a case for how it might erode the rock below it, right? Okay? But what they don't explain is how would you account for that erosion from that point up to the bottom of the bridge? Water doesn't just leap up and grab rock and come back down, okay? So their explanation really falls apart when you consider, okay, from the point that it breached, you can account for erosion going down, but you can't account for the erosion going up. So right there you say, no. Slow meandering streams can't do that job, okay? Impossible. And you don't need to have a PhD in geology to see why that wouldn't work. So we're talking at least a minimum of 20 feet, okay? Maybe more. It's kind of hard to measure because you have to get down there and take all kinds of soundings and stuff. But you can see just from the illustration of how that would have had to work. It's like, okay, so something bigger than a meandering stream had to cut that natural bridge. So you can hike through these canyons there, and as you do, you'll see these black stains. That's called desert varnish. It's caused by the element manganese, which kind of leaches out and makes these beautiful black stripes. The next bridge you come to is this one here. This is Kachina Bridge. This is from the viewpoint overlooking. You can see out into it in the middle. I'll zoom in a little bit closer there. Kachina Bridge measures 210 feet tall and 204 feet wide. This is the old interpretive sign, and this is the new interpretive sign. So I'm glad they gave it a facelift, but I'm just sad that they're going to be stuck with their millions of years interpretation. This is at a confluence of two canyons. Two streams actually come together at this point. And they say that flash floods wear away at the abutments and gravity pulls at loose rocks. All right, well, we're going to see how that doesn't quite measure up as well. From their website, this is where they say it originally came in, and then where it gets really tight over there, eventually it made the Kachina Bridge. All right, and here's again the satellite view, and where you see that little pin is where the bridge is, looking from the top down. Here's how those streams originally flowed, okay? They came this way, and they met, and then they say it eventually breached and came through this way and left this bypass over there. Now, if you hike down to Kachina Bridge, you will see this. Now, I want you to focus on this area right there. In June of 1992, a 4,000-ton debris pile broke away and fell off from this portion of the bridge. Okay? Have the flash floods taken that away? Well, no, it's still there. Big old pile of rock is still there. And we're talking about 4,000 tons, but none of it has moved since it fell down. So something else must have helped to create this natural bridge. You get up closer, it's like, nope, they're all still there. And when you do get flooding in that area, okay, the stream that runs through, it doesn't quite get up to the elevation on the bank there. So it's even the flash floods that they have that they can observe, which science is supposed to be about observation. They've not observed flash flood waters even reaching that area to take it away. So then how could it have taken away the entire area of this bridge? But there is something even more interesting about Kachina Bridge. Here's my wife standing there, and she's looking at a spot on the ledge right there. And some of you who are familiar with this Kachina Bridge know what she's looking at. She's looking at a petroglyph, and it resembles a sauropod dinosaur. Oh, really? Yeah, let me take it away. And I'll put it back on you. You say, well, there's 4 legs, long neck, long tail. Why would somebody have put a petroglyph like that on the cliff? Now, Answers in Genesis website talks about 2 people, Sentner and Cole, having examined this, and they've sent people in there who are experts on petroglyphs and pictographs, and they examined it, and they said, well, as far as we can tell, based on the oxidation of the rocks around here, it looks like it's got to be at least 100 or more years old. Okay, and they couldn't give a specific date, but they said it's at least a minimum of at least 100 years old. Well, 100 years ago, the Native Americans living in that area did not have children's books that said millions of years ago dinosaurs roamed the earth. Okay, so they say it looks authentic, but they can't understand what it is or why they would draw it. Maybe they saw one, because if you look around, there's also pictographs of turtles and of antelopes and of other critters and snakes and things. But then there's this sauropod dinosaur. But you'll never find any sort of interpretive sign or anything like that in the park to tell you this, because the rangers don't want to have to answer questions about dinosaur petroglyphs in the park. But if you know what to look for and you know where to look, then you can go down there and hopefully catch it yourself. If you continue your walk through, you'll see these layers, many, many multiple layers laid down, and you'll notice that they're tilted. You can also see these contact lines between the different layers, how they're flat, no erosion between those layers, which means they couldn't have been laid down millions of years apart, one on top of the other, okay, like pancakes, which I learned they don't have pancakes in Fiji. I had to tell the kids a little something different about layers. So I said, take your hands and go like this and build these layers. And they're like, oh, okay, we can get that now. But yeah, for us, we can say, yeah, it looks like one on top of the other on top of the other. And you'll even see some cross bedding in there where the layers are kind of leaning different directions. You might encounter an indigenous creature there. We don't know what his name is, but he was just there sunning himself on the rock. Eventually, the hike will bring you around to the backside of Owatchamo Bridge. Owatchamo Bridge measures 106 feet high, and it measures 180 feet across. Now, just stop for a second and ask yourself, how much water would have to move through that area to carve out all of that supposedly solid rock? Okay, a meandering stream? No way. Meandering stream couldn't do it, okay? It's just too big for any kind of meandering stream to account for that. Now, the new interpretive sign looks like this. You can see a picture on the right, looks like a star picture. And just for fun, I found somebody else who does nighttime photography, and he took that picture there from the National Park Service. And beautiful park there. I think that we might look to see if we can make a trip there to add something like that to our collection at home. But Milky Way at night with the Owatchamo Bridge, what an incredible sight to see. Steve, was it you that mentioned night sky parks there? Yeah, because Utah has some great spots where you're out there and there's no ambient light from the nearby town to affect it. So, and they say there was 2 different stages to create this bridge, because now there is no stream flowing underneath it, but they say at one time there had to be. So let's look at all of this, and we'll go back to our biblical geologic model. So when would all of these layers have been laid down? Well, obviously they would have been laid down during that ascending phase when all these layers are being laid down. The bridges then would have been carved during this dispersive phase when the sheet flow part has pretty much tapered down, and now we have the water still moving through, and it's moving through soft sedimentary layers, and we're talking about massive amounts of water still coursing through this area, hitting soft sediments, and that could easily account for all of these different features we just got done seeing, okay? Whereas the long, slow, millions of years just doesn't make it, folks. All right, so now we'll move on to the next spot, which is Canyonlands National Park. Here's a shot of Canyonlands from a satellite view. Now, from where you're sitting, especially those of you who chose to sit near the back, a little bit hard to see the contours here, but when you look at it from an aerial standpoint like this, you just begin to say, that was a lot of water carving all these little things. And we're going to see more of that. The Canyonlands National Park represents the confluence of the Colorado and the Green River. And when you enter, there's a sign there. One of the first things you'll see as you're entering are these 2 rock formations. They're known as the Monitor and the Merrimack, any of you American history buffs. One of the most famous places that people go to there is this right here. This is called Mesa Arch. And all of the pictures you see that have Mesa Arch are taken from the west, looking through the arch to the east. Why is that? Because on the other side of Mesa Arch is about a 1,200-foot drop-off, sheer drop-off straight down the other side. Another view right there. You can see Mesa Arch in the top middle. You step through the arch, you're done for, okay? It's a one-and-done deal. So when you look out there, you can see, yeah, you got quite a bit of elevation. You're looking out on the canyonlands. As my wife and I were passing through 2 summers ago, we just happened to get there early in the morning, and we happened to catch a sunrise picture. That thing that looks like a beaver on the right, that's just actually some sort of a bush, okay? It's not a living creature. But canyonlands, this is taken from the Green River overlook, so you're looking at the Green River. Notice, first of all, there's a flat plateau on the horizon. How do you get flat plateaus like that, spanning miles and miles and miles and miles? Well, you had to have a lot of sheet erosion, okay? So that would have been during that initial abative phase. And then you have a second layer here, and then here's the Green River flowing through there. But here is where the fun part happens. Notice this little side canyon there, and this one there, and this one there, and this one there, and this one there, and another one there. So you have all of these side canyons being formed, and yet there's no stream or anything going into there to cut them down. How do side canyons like this form? Let's go back and take a look at their aerial view. Now, what makes the best sense? You say, well, it's either a little bit of water over long periods of time or a lot of water over a little bit of time. There's a fellow who has a ministry in Sedona. His name is Guy Forsyth. His name of his ministry is Crying Rocks Ministry. And he dug up a video that he shared with me some time ago. And I said, can I borrow that? And he said, oh, sure, absolutely. It was some research done. And I didn't ask him, I need to go back and ask him specifically where he got it from. But it involves a process known as groundwater sapping, okay? So let me explain what was done at this university here. This is all sand, basically, sandy material. It's on a slightly sloped area here, okay? And they have water permeating from the backside, keeping it all very saturated. And so they kept water saturated on the left side, but on the right side it slopes down, and then there's a trough that allows any excess to escape out, okay? And just by keeping this sand saturated with water, the sand will eventually slough off and go into the canyon, quote unquote, on the right-hand side. So it's a time-lapse photography, so up in the upper left you'll see a time lapse, but look at what happens when you just have super saturated material. Okay? It's just basically the weight of this saturated material with the water inside just forces it to continually slough off as long as it has a place to slough off into. So if the Green River has cut through and made a channel, and now you have these side canyons that have this very saturated water, it has a place to evacuate to, and it creates side canyons that look amazingly like what you see at the Canyonlands. So here you have actual scientific experiment that was done, and they ran it several different times, and each time by varying the amounts of water in the sand, they got slightly different features, but it all creates these same little side canyons. And so there you have a model, and the model works. But the other explanation is that a stream cut it, but you saw there's no streams going in at the head of these canyons. So again, we have confirmation that the biblical flood model works. So the layers again laid down during the ascending phase, and those side canyons were carved during the dispersive phase. All right, we good to go? All right, strap yourselves in. We're going to make a little jog up here to Arches National Park. Arches National Park has become so popular now that from April through October, you need to have a permit to get in. Now, it's not like it is, I think it costs $2. You go online and you say, I plan on being at the park on this day at around this time, because like they're done in 1 hour intervals, okay? And so you have to show up at the time that your permit allows, and then you're allowed to go in because they've got so much traffic going on. If you get there between 7 and 8 in the morning, I think you can get in without a permit, or at 4 in the afternoon beyond, you can get in without a permit. But if you want to get in the middle of the day, during those months, because that's the busiest time, you need to make advance arrangements. There are over 2,000 arches in the park. This is part of the map. You come in from the south and wend your way up. One of the first places you come to is the Park Avenue viewpoint. As you look out at Park Avenue, there is this rock formation called the Queen Nefertiti because it looks like an Egyptian headdress. This is a view looking down Park Avenue. Now it says that this area was carved out during the middle of the Jurassic period. So, and it's the Entrada sandstone, which is right there, middle of the Jurassic. You go back here to this guy's chart, it's middle of Jurassic. That puts it between 145 million years and 199 million years. They say that was a long time ago, right? Yeah, well, let's see, does it really hold up, or does the biblical flood model work better? Here are some of the rock formations you'll see as you continue on. This first one that you see in the foreground is called the Organ. The one in the background is called the Tower of Babel. And then you come to the fiery furnace here, a bunch of strange looking little hoodoos there. And eventually you'll make your way back to the Devil's Garden trailhead. Now we're going to switch to a satellite view, and we're going to zoom a little bit closer. Now you'll notice lines, parallel lines running in kind of a northwest to southeasterly direction. And we're going to zoom a little bit closer. A little bit closer. I put a trapezoid there over Landscape Arch, which is one of the first arches you'll come to when you see it. And that's what it looks like. Happened to have a little bit of snow on the ground that day. Landscape Arch measures 290 feet across, 77 feet high. A lot of people have thought it would be the next arch to collapse because it's very thin at one point. But interestingly enough, this was wall arch prior to August 4th, 2008, not that many years ago. During that night it collapsed, and when they came the next morning, this is what was there. Okay? So, we've seen arches collapse, but we've never seen arches form. Think about that. How can you create a theory about how arches form unless you've done some sort of work on that, okay? Or unless you have a viable model. Well, we already have a viable working model. It's worked so far for the first couple places we've seen. Let's continue on. One of the most well-known arches in the park is this one here, okay? And this is called Delicate Arch. And there's a body down there. Looks like me for perspective. Yeah, I think that was me right there. And this one looks like my wife down there, okay? It's so popular that they put it on their license plates. And you say, well, why do we always look at it from one side? Well, because on the back side, again, is a sheer drop-off. You get off the side, you can see there's not a whole lot of room to get behind it. If you do, and you try to get the whole arch, you're going to step off backwards, and you're going to plummet to an untimely demise. So I highly recommend you don't try to get a picture looking through the other direction. Now, Mike Ord wrote in the Journal of Creation back in 2009 this article. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I just want to highlight a few little different segments there. He talks about the assumed uniformitarian origin was not observed. He goes on and talks about how they say that arches should have weathered or collapsed long before the material around it was able to erode. Okay, in other words, the whole thing should have eroded. It shouldn't have eroded and left arches. This guy named Crick May noted that natural bridges seem to defy uniformitarianism. Well, yeah, you think? Okay. He goes on to say that no one has seen an arch formed by their mechanism. Okay. So all they've got is a theory or maybe even a working hypothesis, but they have not seen it happen. And it says here, arches would have formed during either the sheet flow or channelized flow phase of the retreating stage, while the natural bridges probably formed during the channelized phase. He goes on to say in the same article here that he's quoting the evolutionists now. There must be some factor that locally enhances the effect of erosions. And then they say, how erosion is localized within a rock fin to form an arch is enigmatic. Well, it's enigmatic if you've rejected God's word, okay? It's enigmatic if you're looking for a naturalistic explanation that doesn't involve a worldwide flood. In other words, enigmatic means long, slow, gradual processes don't work. Now, In the brochure that they give you when you approach, they show you this, and they say from left to right, it starts with the earth cracking and making what they call fins, okay? Then eventually more erosion, then more erosion, more erosion. And they've essentially got that part right. What they don't have right is the fact that this all happened as one singular event during Noah's flood and during the runoff phase, okay? They say it took millions of years. Now, most of us, I hope, are familiar with Awesome Science Media, right? Okay, we know about that. We know about Kyle Justice, used to be a Northwest resident there, executive producer and director of Awesome Science Media, and his son Noah hosted a 12-part series. And I'm going to share a brief little clip that he did about Arches National Park here. So here's where the audio comes in handy. Make sure we've got the volume on this. Ready to go?
The fact that bridges and arches are not forming today, but have formed at a high rate in the past, would give good motivation for believing in catastrophic processes, such as the global flood as described in the Bible. A recent lab experiment at Charles University in Prague might also give clues for another model of how the arches formed. In this experiment, scientists submerged a piece of sandstone in water. A weight was put on top of the sandstone, then a funny thing happened. The water began to erode the softer parts of the submerged sandstone, but the harder parts of the sandstone stayed, causing an underwater arch to form. This experiment would fit well with the flood model. During the first 150 days of the flood, water would have laid down the sandstones quickly. They would have been saturated with water, while additional sediments were deposited on top of the sandstone. In this model, arches would have formed in these sediment layers. As the floodwaters receded, massive sheet erosion would have taken off the top layers and some of the sandstone underneath, leaving the arches. Because of natural erosion over the past 4,000 years, the arches would have naturally become smaller and fewer, leaving only the 2,000 that we find in the park today. When we use a catastrophic model to build arches, the observations make a lot more sense, rather than the slow and gradual processes proposed by naturalists. Arches National Park, a great testament to the global flood. Even though it was a global destruction, God left some pretty great formations for us to admire today. Science, it's awesome.
I think we can all agree, science is awesome. That's why you're here this morning, right? On the Saturday before Easter. Thank you for coming out again today. I do appreciate your attendance here this morning. Again, we have the layers being laid down during the ascending phase. And as he says, a lot of this would have happened during the dispersive phase, the cutting of these channels. Now these ridges, these fins they talk about, you can go out and walk on several of them. And when my wife and I were out there many years ago, we ran to a couple from Great Britain. They were coming back, and we took their picture. They took our picture. This was the one they showed at the end. This is called Double Arch, and you can walk up to it just for perspective. There's some guy, oh, again, it looked like me maybe, sat there for give you an idea of how big this thing is. Arches National Park is located just a few miles north of Moab, Utah. And since this is kind of a road trip, I have to recommend, if you're going through Moab, Utah, you need to eat at Pasta J's restaurant. Really good stuff there. In fact, they have gluten-free, in case you have a gluten-free. But if you happen to like Indian food, there's a brand new restaurant open there called the Indo Grill. Ate there last time we were there. Really out of this world good Indian food. All right. Now, to get up to Dinosaur National Quarry, there's a couple ways you can take. One of the easiest ways is to dip into Colorado and come back up there. Okay, Dinosaur National Monument. You check into the visitor center. You're greeted by this Stegosaurus there. There's no parking up at the actual quarry, so you have to take a shuttle, which they put you in. And you ride up in the shuttle, and it takes you to this building here. As you're driving up to this building, you'll notice the rock layers are tilted. Some of them at a really seriously tilted angle, about 54 degrees, they say. Now, any of us know, just from having played in the mud when we were kids, that these things get laid down horizontally. Okay, you don't lay down layers leaning at a 54-degree angle. So this place was, to borrow an expression, it was rocking and rolling at one point. And when you get into the quarry, the wall of the quarry is tilted at about the same angle. And pictures, unfortunately, don't do it justice. You just can't quite get the contrast and the lighting and everything else, but try to get you some good ones here. But it's littered with all kinds of dinosaur bones. And if you look carefully, you'll notice that these bones are all mixed in with marine fossils, notably clams, okay? But it's just really hard to see them with the photographs. They do have one that they say you can even go up and touch this bone here. There are two interpretive signs that do mention the clams, but it's almost like a kind of an incidental. We hope you don't really notice this part, clams, and you go on by, okay? Because either the clams grew legs and crawled into Utah to die and be buried, or the dinosaurs and the clams were in the same environment at the same time. How does that work? Now, again, let's look at some of the geologic layers. I want to focus on this corner right there. Let's zoom into that thing. And look at how those layers are curved and bent upward. Now, I don't have to tell you this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Layers don't become tilted or bent over long, slow, gradual eons of time. They are formed rapidly while the layers are still soft and pliable. Otherwise, the rocks would shatter. And if you've been following Andrew Snelling lately and some of the work he's been doing in Carbon Canyon, in Grand Canyon, he's got some great stuff that's going to be coming on that. But pretty hard, irrefutable evidence that all those layers in the Grand Canyon were laid down at one time. But we're not here to talk about the Grand Canyon today. We're here to talk about Utah, right? So, the ascending phase is when they were laid down. And again, somewhere in this abative phase, when you had the sheet erosion exposing all of these layers. Now, from Dinosaur National Monument, you head west, and the next town you come to is the town of Vernal, Utah. And you notice on the map here, here's a little something I threw in. It's about 11 miles, 19-minute drive out of downtown Vernal. It takes you up to the McConkey Ranch petroglyph site. And has anybody here ever heard of or been to the McConkey Ranch petroglyph site? You have to go, okay? Now, I've been all over the Southwest. I've seen many, many, many petroglyph sites. This one tops them all. I mean, second to none, really. And so you go in, there's a little paved parking lot, you park, and the suggested donation is $5 per vehicle, okay? There's a little green ammo box welded to a chain, hooked to a table. You drop your money in there. There's a refrigerator over in the corner. If you want a soda, put $1 in, get yourself a soda. If you want to get a t-shirt or baseball cap, put some more money in the thing and get yourself a baseball cap. And then there's sticky notes all over where people write their response. They stick it on the wall inside this little building. It's really cool, all on the honor system. You get a little map, you hike on this trail. You have to clamber over rocks and stuff like that. It'd be impossible for a wheelchair, extremely difficult for somebody who needs a cane or a walker. But if you're able to ambulate around, you'll see some petroglyphs. And these aren't just like little 6, 8, 10-inch petroglyphs. These are like 5 foot, 6 foot tall. And you can walk right up to them and see them. Some of these big trapezoidal chests, headdresses, shields, and things like that. A lot of people there. Here's some other ones. Other ones there. Here's two. Notice the guy on the left is holding up somebody else's head. Okay, yeah. Guy's got a skirt, belts, again, breastplate. It's like, these are very ornate. Like I say, unequal anywhere else in the Southwest that I've ever seen. When would the petroglyphs have been made? Well, pretty much during that modern phase, okay? This is back when enough people had spread out and crossed over into North America and set up cultures and doing stuff like that. But hey, since you're there, I mean, it's only, 11 miles away. All right, we're going to drop over to Goblin Valley State Park. Here's the sign, and when you get to Goblin Valley State Park, you get to the viewpoint, and you see these incredibly weird-looking hoodoos. They look like mushrooms all over the place, stone mushrooms. This is identified as the Entrada sandstone, so this is somewhere between 140 and 170 million years ago. Is there a problem with this 140 to 170 million years ago? Yeah. People who study erosion rates Okay, the geologists who study erosion, and that's their main thing, they say that the continents, all the continents on the globe, should erode into the oceans somewhere between 8 and 50 million years. So they give it an average of about 15, okay? Well, if that's the case, then why haven't these things eroded 4 times out into the ocean? Okay, they're still there to be amazed at and looked at. So, so they say, well, the Earth's crust must be rising at the same rate that it's eroding. Isn't that just amazing? Now, I'm going to take some of you back in time. I hope you don't mind me doing this, but about 30 years ago, there was a movie called Galaxy Quest that was filmed, and part of it was filmed at this state park at their location there.
Hey, don't open that! It's an alien planet! Is there air? You don't know!
Seems okay.
Okay. I didn't see any ancient mining. I didn't see any beryllium spheres. I didn't see any rock monsters chasing me either. So very safe place to visit, okay? Highly recommended. You could just tour and walk around there. Hard to get lost because the parking lot and a little visitor center is elevated, so all you have to do is just look around. There you go, and you just head back. So getting lost is not really an issue. Now, the sign as you enter the park says that this was seafront property at one time. And they got a little map there, and they talk about how this used to be where the ocean and the land was and stuff, and waves and tidal flats deposited sand, silt, and clay. With pressure and with time, the sediment became goblin-forming entrada sandstone. Yeah, well, I think you're looking at this and you're saying, I'm getting more and more skeptical of this whole evolutionary idea anyway. Okay, and again, like I say, the geologists who study the sedimentation and the geologists who study erosion are kind of at odds with each other on this one. They would have been laid down during the ascending phase, and it would have been somewhere probably at that bridge between the abative phase and the dispersive phase. And they have campsites available there. As you drive out, you're greeted by these 3 sentinels there. And then you head down to Capitol Reef National Park. All right, Capitol Reef National Park is a very interesting place. The capital part of the name comes from this dome here. Looks like a Capitol dome, okay? And the reef part comes from this area here. This is called the Water Pocket Fold. It acted as a barrier to east-west travelers, so when the people were traveling through that area, they came to here and they're like, whoa, how are we going to get across this place? It looks like a reef in some ways, and it acts like a reef would for ocean travel, right? You know, getting past the reef is kind of dangerous. They say that this is a monocline. This is how the geologists interpret this, as a monocline. What is a monocline? Well, I'm going to get to that in just a second. This is, in fact, the largest exposed monocline in North America. It's just under 100 miles long. It runs north and south all the way down to Lake Powell. I took somebody in an airplane took this picture of it, and I had to give him the credit up there, okay, if you can read it. Now, what is a monocline? A monocline is an example where you have faulting of the granite layers below, okay, and then you have uplift, but the fault doesn't run all the way to the surface. And the uppermost layers, which are sedimentary, fold in its place, okay? So you have faulting below in the granite rocks, which would have been creation rocks, but you have folding of the sedimentary rocks above, and so that's what they call a monocline. You can only get a monocline if those upper layers were what? Hard or soft? Soft, okay? Now, is there something else that's unique and peculiar to the water pocket fold? Oh, absolutely. When you look closely, it's full of clams. Well, that's where they get the reef part. They say, well, this must have been an ocean at one time because there's a reef and there's clams. It's like, how many hundreds of miles from the ocean are you? What elevation are you? How those clams managed to fly up there? No, they didn't fly up there. They had to crawl up there. No, they didn't crawl up there. No, this was, they say, an ancient shoreline. No, it was just where a bunch of clams got buried during Noah's flood. You can hike up to the Hickman Bridge, beautiful little bridge there. Another trail takes you to this place called Chimney Rock. It's a lovely little spot. But as you're hiking around, you'll come to an area where you see something very, very interesting. You see these black, rounded basalt rocks. Okay, some of them are up to 9 feet in diameter. They're called lava bombs. Say lava bombs. Yeah, lava bombs. Okay, it's basaltic rock. They say they were ejected from a volcano. The exact volcano, they're uncertain because there are a few in that area. They say in order for these lava bombs to have been hurled up and have had enough time to cool before they hit the ground, because if they were still hot and soft, they would have splattered like cow pies or something, right? But they're hard enough to land and stay intact, so they had to be ejected at least 3,300 feet into the atmosphere. Now, just to do a little bit of research on this, I found that in November of the year 2010, there was a volcano in Iceland that was spewing lava bombs. And somebody in an airplane was taking pictures of them. Watch when it gets closer. You'll see they leave a vapor trail as they're flying into the air. Do you see them there coming down? And what is that? We see tourists standing on a ledge about a mile away looking at a volcano spewing lava bombs. If I had the inclination to visit Iceland, and I had the money to afford the inclination to visit Iceland, I am not going to spend my time standing next to a volcano watching it spit lava bombs into the atmosphere. Not my idea of a really fun day, right? But these people got some sort of a thrill out of it. But look at those things. Look, here's a whole bunch of them being peppered out all at once. Now, there's a similar, and there's some more little people down there. You can find similar lava bombs along the old Route 66 just as you enter Arizona outside of Needles, California. I should get a picture of those sometime. I've got some, but that's part of Route 66, not part of this talk, but anyway. So yeah, the lava bombs. And they're on the surface, okay? They're not half buried or partially buried, whatever, so they're all on top. So all these layers would have been laid down during the ascending phase. They would have been exposed during the abative and dispersive phase, but then these volcanoes would have happened during the residual phase. It would have happened after the water was down enough. But again, remember how we talked about the Ice Age? There would have been volcanism lasting for several hundred years after the floodwaters ended, because the volcanoes, as Steve Austin says, it would have been an exponential decline. There would have been initially a lot, eventually tapering down to just the few that we have today. So lava bombs on the surface are proof that this was a residual activity that happened after the flood. Our next place we're going to go to is the Escalante Petrified Forest State Park. But to get there, you have to drive across the top of something called the Hogback. The Hogback is the Utah State Scenic Byway. Now, appropriately named. If you're going to pick a state scenic byway, this was the best one. A fella who goes by the handle of the Flip-Flop Wanderer had a drone, and he programmed the drone to follow him in his car as he was driving along. This highway is 2 lanes, basically, and then the fall-off on both sides of this ridgeline is about anywhere from 800 to 1,200 feet. And they conveniently recently put in little turnouts so people could take photographs, because on our first trip there were no turnouts, and people were parking on the highway and taking pictures, and it's like, you know, if you're the driver, you don't want to look down. You just want to keep your eyes on the road, right? So, but there's an idea of where you're at. So, very nice of this guy to get his drone to photograph this and to put it on YouTube where it can be looked at. So, kind of a fun little way to flip-flop there. You're in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, and you come to this Escalante Petrified Forest State Park. Now, when I talked about the Four Corners region, I mentioned that there is a Petrified Forest National Park outside of Holbrook, Arizona. This one here is a state park, and we kind of stumbled across it on our first trip that way. We said, well, hey, we're here, let's go take a look. You go in, you pay the little state park fee, you park your vehicle, you get the interpretive little thing, and it puts you on the trail. And this trail is really cool because you have to clamber over and around these big chunks of beautiful petrified wood. The hike isn't terribly strenuous. It eventually takes you out to the edge of this hanging valley right here. I'll talk about hanging valleys a little bit later when we get over to Zion. But you can see these logs are right there. And then, like I say, the colors are just amazing. I found this chart here that talks about the origin of colors in petrified woods. Reds are caused by iron. Oranges are also caused by iron. Some yellows are caused by iron. What this doesn't mention here, though, sometimes the yellow that you see is caused by uranium. Okay? When they mine for uranium, they call it what? Yellow cake. Okay? So there's different colors, different minerals that create these different colors in petrified wood. Blue, copper, iron, black or gray is carbon or manganese. Green can be from copper or chromium, and sometimes iron. All right, where would the biblical geological model put this? Again, they're all laid down during the ascending phase, and this would have been, I put it right as the marker again between this abative and dispersive phase, because we're not really in a valley, but yet we do have that hanging valley on the other side, but you do have hills and things around there. Kodachrome Basin State Park is next, all right, and then we'll take our break, all right? The entrance to Kodachrome Basin State Park. Kodachrome Basin State Park, it's most notably known for these features known as pipes or chimneys. I'm going to throw in this right now. They have the best shower facility at their campsite of any state campground I've ever been to. Beautifully ceramic tiles, big square shower heads that come down, and it's just like raining on you. Oh, it's wonderful. Okay, none of this, restricted flow type of stuff. But these sandstone pipes or chimneys come up from the layer below. They vary in size from a few feet across. The biggest one measures 53 feet across in diameter. The tallest one in the park is 172 feet high. There's over 60 of them in the park, but over 100 of them in southern Utah. Here's a picture with some people standing next to it for scale. If you hike up on this one trail, there's several miles of hiking trails. Most of it is all on level ground, but you have to go up and down through little tiny gullies there. But you can hike up to this one viewpoint, and you can see this beautiful whitish gray surrounded by the red hills. Okay, now the red, okay, that you see is the Entrada sandstone, and the whitish is the Carmel Formation. So now the Carmel Formation, they say, the secular geologists say, was laid down 179 million years ago. The layer on top of it, the Entrada sandstone, they say was laid down 166 million years ago, which puts 13 million years between these layers. Okay? And yet what we've got here is that the upper layer sat on top of the lower layer for 13 million years, and then the lower layer decided to start squirting up like toothpaste out of a tube to come up and make these little pipes. And they would have had to come up through 1,035 feet of rock to do that. Now, has anybody here, could you even imagine rock for 135 million years being soft like toothpaste? Now, I don't see anybody nodding their head. I see a few people looking like, what are you talking about? Yeah, just doesn't happen, just doesn't seem realistic. So they try to come up with alternative theories. Well, maybe there were fissures opened up and wind and stuff blew the sandstone down. But yet when they compare what the pipes are made of, it's totally identical to the layer that's below it. So, biblical model would say all of these layers were laid down at once. There were earth movements that caused fissures to open up. The layer underneath was then, because of the pressure on top, squirted up. Okay, it hardened because it had a harder silica base. Okay, and so when the floodwaters then went off, the vertical chimneys or the pipes stayed, and the other ones eroded away. Makes much better sense. When you first come in, this is one of the first ones you see. It's hard to really kind of get a perspective, but my wife and I call this one the candle in a cupcake, okay, because it looks like somebody stuck a birthday candle in a birthday cupcake. They have a beautiful campground there. This is where we stayed one time, and we had this just looking right out at our spot. This was campsite number 13. We want to get campsite number 12 next time we go there. Yeah, that was number 13. Number 12 is the next one over. That would be right in your backyard. All right, let's take a look here. Biblical geologic model. The layers would have been laid down during the ascending phase. And this would have been the abative or the sheep phase because we're not looking at any real deep canyons here. All right. I said the next spot is Bryce Canyon. To get from Kodachrome Basin to Bryce Canyon, you have to pass through the town of Tropic, Utah. While you're passing through Tropic, Utah, you're bound to be hungry by now. I highly recommend the pizza place, okay? Family-run pizza restaurant, really good deal, and they do have gluten-free crust there in case you have anybody who's gluten-free. I see Mark has made his way up here, so this is a good time to call for the intermission. Do you have something to announce then? And he's going to grab that microphone.
Yes,
Let's do it.
let's take a 20-minute break till. Thank you. Sorry. And thank you, Michael, for continuing. This is excellent. Hope everyone's taking notes. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if there was an intro to go back with that or not. How many of you, raise your hand, if you are aware of the fact that, now I'm not running competition with what Mark was just saying. Creation Ministries International is hosting a Creation Maker Conference in Littleton, Colorado, the weekend after 4th of July weekend. How many of you knew about that coming up? How many of you, okay, then if I ask how many of you are registered to be there, I expect that many or fewer hands to go up. Okay, now that you know about it, if you have an itch or an inkling to go to this ICR conference in Littleton, Colorado, the weekend after 4th of July falls on a Friday. And so this is like the Thursday, Friday, Saturday after 4th of July weekend, coming up this July. If you're there, look for me because I'm going to be there. And we'll say hi and introduce each other. It sounds like what you got going on here coming up in October would be fun. If things work out, who knows, I might be back. It's hard to say. Sometimes my trips to Portland are kind of whatever. I try to make them at least once a year because I have kids and grandkids. I have a granddaughter, Ariana, there in the front row here, just watching, learning all about Utah. She's going to know more about Utah than anybody else in her 5th grade class, so that's pretty cool. Then she'll be able to ask them questions, say, hey, did you know about this? All right, I told you that we would be hitting Bryce Canyon next. First time we visited there was in March. It had snowed the night before. It was named after a fellow by the name of Ebenezer Bryce. He thought this would be a great area to try to keep cattle in, but it was such a labyrinth of formations and stuff. He got really frustrated trying to find his cows, and so he, after a while, gave it up. But here's a picture of some of the hoodoos you see. This is from a distance. This part is called the Bryce Amphitheater. If you go to the visitor center and you need to use the restroom, you go down this little hallway, and the restrooms are on the left, and on the right you see this poster. It says, "Who do you love?" If any of you remember George Thorogood and the Destroyers from the 70s, you might recognize that. But anyway, okay. So the Bryce Canyon, what they recommend is that you drive all the way to the south end of the park and then turn around and come back out because everything you're going to see is on the right-hand side, and that way you're not having to make constant left-hand turns. This is just one example here. This is the natural bridge. It sits at 8,627 feet elevation, okay? It's really a natural arch because to be a natural bridge, you have to have evidence of a stream either currently or at some time going underneath it, but there's really no evidence of a stream ever going through there, but they call it natural bridge anyway. This is Thor's Hammer, and you see that. One of the trails that you can hike on is the Navajo Loop Trail. And the first part of the trail consists of a whole bunch of switchbacks going down into the canyon. Eventually takes you to this nice little meadow. Switching to Google Maps 3D image, looks like that. And now I'm going to show you a panoramic view. For those of you who have been to just about any national park or national monument, you'll probably recognize this. I'm going to do it. It's going to panorama. It's going to slide by, and it's because it's very long and narrow. And if I try to squeeze it all in, it'd be so short that you wouldn't be able to really make much of it out. I'm going to bring it across. I want you to look at the bright green line. Okay, that bright green line that I've painted into this is the Kaibab limestone, which represents the top layer of the Grand Canyon. Okay, the Kaibab limestone. We're going to be watching as this goes by. So if this looks familiar, hang on. But what I want you to focus on is the green line. Maybe I can even get my pointer to get ready to go. Okay, let's do this here. So here is that green line right there, and we're following it down and across and down, and then eventually it kind of curves up right there. Okay, you see how it goes. All right, so I said that that line represents the Kaibab limestone. But notice, if you would please, you see where that crack is going up? Okay, right there, that black line. There's a whole bunch of rock there. Well, how much rock are we talking about? Well, it emerges out near Cedar City, Utah, right there. And if you go from there up to the Cedar Breaks area near Bryan Head, it's just under 10,000 feet of sediment that was laid down on top of the top layer of the Grand Canyon. 10,000 feet of sediment. Now, you're not gaining 10,000 feet in elevation because, as you saw, the layers are kind of bend down and then kind of curve up this way. So, when we talked about the Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monument, the Grand Staircase incorporates these layers. They're easily seen as you drive through that Grand Staircase area. But you could take pictures on that entire scenic drive, and it's not going to do you justice because it's so everywhere back and forth. The best way to experience it is to just drive through it and let the kinesthetic effect just kind of wash over you as you're looking at these big, tall mountains carved out, and you say, I see layers on this side, I see layers on this side, and I'm in the middle, which means that at one time this whole valley was full, and where did it all go? Okay, had to be taken away by some sort of process. Now, here's what's interesting. Let's look at it from a perspective. If all the layers were flat, you'd be looking at, right there, from the Grand Canyon up to Bryce Canyon, almost 10,000 feet in elevation. Let's go back to our other thing here. See how long and skinny it would have been? From this high point there, okay, at Bryce Canyon, to the north rim of the Grand Canyon is only about 100 miles as the crow flies. And you've got all of these different layers, 10,000 feet. But because the layers are kind of bent down, you're not gaining 10,000 feet in elevation. So, when would these layers have been laid down? Again, they would have been laid down during this ascending phase, and they would have been exposed during the abated phase. Now, they call it Bryce Canyon. No, it's not really a canyon. It's just more of the last outcropping. When the water started to recede, they just didn't quite erode away, but from this area out, okay? So this was like the high point that just didn't get eroded. And there's a whole lot more to see. I mean, I could take you to every single viewpoint at Bryce Canyon, but then we'd be here until 2 o'clock this afternoon or something, and that wouldn't work for most of us, okay? The next spot along the way that most people know about is Zion, but we're going to take a little detour here. From Bryce to get to Zion, we're going to detour off to Cedar Breaks National Monument. I discovered Cedar Breaks National Monument on a different trip. I was going up to Yellowstone back in 2014 with the Creation Encounters people. And on the way back, we were going to stay in Cedar City. And I said, oh, look, there's a place up here we should go visit. And when you get there, you say, wow, this looks amazingly like Bryce Canyon. Well, it's basically the same layers, but you're on the other side of this mountain range. So it's much smaller than Bryce Canyon, and it has almost identical features. One of the things that it has, though, in Cedar Breaks National Monument is this. Does anybody recognize this? Steve might. Bristlecone pine. Now, bristlecone pine trees are supposedly the oldest living organisms on the planet. How old are they, you might be wondering? Well, the USDA website says that they are 4,789 years old. Well, that's pretty precise, isn't it? Well, maybe I should make it 4,790 because I got that information last year. But if the Earth is 4.2 billion years old, why is the oldest living thing only 4,789 years old? And why do they call it a bristlecone pine? Well, because when you get up to the thing, it feels like a bottle brush. Okay, really kind of a neat little thing. So let's do a little bit of math here, okay? You don't have to get your calculators. You don't have to get your phone. But this is the year 2025. If we subtract 4,790 years, okay, that would put us at 2,765 years BC. All right. Now, according to Bishop Ussher's, reckoning, okay, they say the creation occurred in 4004 and that Noah's flood occurred 1,565 years after that. That would put us at the year 2348 BC, which, when you do a little bit of math, is only a 417-year difference. Okay, now accounting for errors in dating, okay, and accounting for other things, 417 years is a very, very reasonable window for bristlecone pine trees to get started and the seedlings to grow and planted, okay? And so it fits very easily within the biblical time frame. But again, we go back to the question, if the earth is 4.2 billion years old and there never was a flood, how come this is the oldest living thing we can find? Again, does that prove that the Bible is true? No, but it confirms that the Bible is true. That confirms that the data that we find in science doesn't conflict with the Bible, that the Bible can give us an accurate account of history and therefore an accurate account of science as well. Okay, now I said we're going to head over to Zion. This is the east entrance to Zion. As you go into the park, one of the first things you come upon is Checkerboard Mesa. It is made of Navajo sandstone. And as you look closely, you'll see cross bedding. You see horizontal and vertical lines that look like this. Now they say that the Navajo sandstone does not normally outcrop in this area. They say that it comes from Appalachia, okay? And so they say it was transported across country. This chart here comes from Answers in Genesis website. And they show that the composition of this Navajo sandstone came from the Appalachian Mountains. Now, we could spend a few minutes getting into the idea of when did the Appalachians form underwater. Floodwaters were still working at eroding it away. That's why they're nice and rounded and everything else, but we won't go there. Just to say that even secular geologists recognize the similarities between Appalachia and Navajo sandstone. But as you continue to enter the park, you'll come to this tunnel. And you have to wait. The tunnel was built basically for smaller vehicles back in the day. And here's the map from their website. And you get a little closer, you can see this is a tunnel. It's pretty much a, excuse me, I'm going to have to not do that in front of the microphone. They pretty much run it one way because now with big RVs and stuff like that, you can't be having people go in two directions. But if you were to enter the tunnel, you'd be going along. And eventually you'd come across a few of these little windows that they put in there just for convenience, just to give you a sense of awe and amazement and wonder as you're entering the park. I will tell you that it has become so crowded in Zion that to get in there, give yourself plenty of time to find a parking space because it's going to be pretty dicey. Last time we were there, I think it took us 20 minutes driving on a parking lot just to find one empty spot. But it's a fascinating place. I mean, if you ever have the opportunity. Here's another shot of some of those windows from down below. Here's one from a little farther away. Some of the things you're going to see is the West Temple and the altar of sacrifice. They named it the altar of sacrifice because, it looks kind of like blood flowing down off there. This feature here is called the Great White Throne. And you can get opposite the Great White Throne by hiking up the West Rim Trail. You hike up a little ways, you come to the end of what's called Refrigerator Canyon. And while my wife and I were hiking there years ago, another couple from Great Britain, incidentally, again, they were coming out and we asked if they would like us to take their picture, and they took our picture there. They call it Refrigerator Canyon because there is this wonderful cool breeze that continually blows through this little canyon. After you've gotten up this far, it's kind of refreshing. You walk to the end of Refrigerator Canyon, and you come to this rock formation here. As you look more closely, I want you to notice the cross bedding. Remember, we talked a little bit about cross bedding earlier, where layers are laid down this way and then this way, and it indicates the direction of flow that the current was flowing when it laid these things down. And then you have these lines here that separate that one from that one from that one. Look at this. This is what is called a recumbent parabolic fold, okay? The layers are actually folded back on themselves. Okay, there's a few spots in Sedona, Arizona, where you can see something like that. Solid rocks don't fold back on themselves, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, you need to have all these rock layers had to have been soft and laid down at one time with a lot of earth movements going on, which you can imagine there were some serious earth movements happening at the time. At this point, you turn around and now you're facing up Walter's Wiggles, which is a series of switchbacks that takes you up to Scouts Landing. From Scouts Landing, you can take a break and say, I'm done, I'm going to stay here and head back down. Or if you're not terribly faint of heart, you can try to go out to Angel's Landing. And you have to go on this narrow trail, and it takes you up to this ridge up there, and that's the view. That's to the south. If you look to the east, there is the Great White Throne. And just to prove that I really was there and I didn't take this off of the internet, and that was me with a perspiration on my t-shirt because it was kind of vigorous. I thought just being up there was interesting enough. Oh, those kids you see lying down, they were kids on spring break from Washington University Medical School. As I was up there, this guy, next thing you know, I see him running up. All he's wearing is a pair of jogging shorts and shoes and a really fancy watch. And he's like, and he's running up. He gets up to the top, he stops, he checks his pulse, waits a few seconds, turns around and goes running back down with, he's not holding on to any chains or rails. And I said, this guy knows exactly where each foot wants to go. He must do this on a regular basis. One of these Iron Man kind of guys. Not my cup of tea, but anyway, certainly worth the trip up there. But it's going to have good shape to get there. I mentioned hanging valleys before. If you go to the Kalab Canyon portion, which is, you have to go out and around, get on Interstate 15, head up north, and you come back in, and you'll see this example of what's called a hanging valley. So you've got this valley here, but it empties into a much larger valley here. So what you have going on is this. Remember how we talked about groundwater sapping? Okay, you have this canyon, the big one here, carved out first, and then other water coming in, and eventually the water dries up, and so it leaves you with this hanging valley, which during monsoon seasons or runoff, water will come down and leave those beautiful manganese stripes there, known as desert varnish. Okay, layers were formed during the ascending phase. In this case, this is a canyon, so that would have been a dispersive phase, carving these things out for people to see and be amazed and wonder. Then we go down to Coral Pink Sand Dune State Park. Has anybody ever been to Coral Pink Sand Dune State Park? Then you ought to try to make the trip there at least once. Here's what it looks like. And what do you see? Well, you see sand that's coral pink in color. My son bought a house in Newburgh many years ago. It was built in 1962. And he called me to tell me, Dad, I bought this house, whatever. I said, how do you like it? He goes, well, there's one thing. He says, the bathroom sink and the bathtub, they're pink. And I said, no, son, it's called coral. That's what they called it back in 1962. And big sand dunes there. And then they got this interpretive sign, and they say, why are the dunes are here? And then they give you an ingredient. They say, gather white sand, cover with ocean, and add iron oxide. Let it sit for 170 million years. I bet you're already sensing a problem with that, right? Well, let's take a look at why. There's coral pink sand dunes. Now, you see those hills in the background? Remember, according to secular geologists, they should have eroded away after about 15 million years, but they're still there. So when did this ocean come in, and when did this everything else come in, and why would you fuse it? And why do we not see sand dunes turning into solid rock today? There are many inland sand dune locations in the world. We have Oregon Dunes National Park. If you go up north on the Oregon coast, you get to Tierra del Mar. There's some sand dunes around there. But none of them are turning to stone in front of our eyes. And besides that, remember how we saw these layers that were laid down? They're all flat. There's no flatness there, okay? If these things were actually done the way they said, then why would we? Okay, they say, okay, you have to add sand. It's like, but they're not turning into stone and they're not flat. So the whole idea of evolution and millions of years falls flat as well. All right. Oh, let's back up here. So anyway, we're looking at the whole thing. This was all just residue left over from the end of the flood. It just happened to be a lot of sand in that area. This is kind of cool. And you didn't hear it from me, but I suppose if you were to sneak like a Gatorade bottle with some sand out there, nobody's going to miss it. I'm just saying, but I didn't say it. But anyway, you get the idea. All right. Now we're going to head down to our last stop here, Snow Canyon State Park. It's outside of St. George, Utah. Not because it gets a lot of snow, but it was named after a fella named Snow. And beautiful. They got nice campsites there, by the way. And a lot of surreal rock formations. You can see stratification. You can see cross-bedding. You can see all kinds of thin layers. And here's a few more. And in this area also, there are lava flows. Now, notice the lava flows are on top, okay, which means they're not covered by sedimentary rock layers. You're already getting an idea of when this would have happened, see, because you've got your biblical glasses on. You're saying, yeah, okay, I'm seeing how this all works. Where you have lava flows, you oftentimes have lava caves or lava tubes, which you can explore, okay? And we have some of those in eastern Oregon. Now, I mentioned Checkerboard Mesa at the beginning of the park, right? You remember Checkerboard Mesa when we went into design? Well, Snow Canyon has something similar, but inverted, okay? They have the Snow Canyon Amphitheater, which is an inverted form because when you get up close, it has the same features that Navajo Mountain had there, or I mean the Navajo Sandstone at the Checkerboard Mesa. Just a little bit interesting. So yeah, you can see there. So the layers were laid down during the ascending phase, the canyon was cut during the dispersive phase, and the lava flows happened during the residual phase. All right, that brings us to the end of the tour. Now we're going to wrap this up here. Psalm 104, verse 8. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place that you appointed for them. Okay, and that tells us the mechanical features. At the end of the flood, we're told that God caused the Earth's crust now was being pushed up. That's how Mount Everest was formed. That's how the Grand Tetons were formed and most of these other formations. And if you happen to go to the top of either of those, you will find marine fossils. Luke 19:40. He, being Jesus, answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out. And really, in a sense, these stones today have been crying out. They've been showing us that the geology that we see, not just in Utah, but pretty much everywhere we go, they're just evident in Utah, confirm the biblical account of the Genesis flood. You've learned to wear those biblical glasses, and I hope that when wearing those biblical glasses, you have come to appreciate the fact that geology is fun. In fact, geology can be incredibly fun. You don't need a college degree to appreciate it. You just need to use a little common sense, start with God's word, make some observations, and ask yourself, which of these two theories makes the best sense? Millions of years and no God, or God and a judgment, which is what those people back in 2 Peter didn't want to have to deal with. Jesus said in John 17:17, Father, sanctify them in the truth, thy word is truth. My hope is that from this presentation this morning, you take away information that will inspire you to believe even more in the truth and the authority of God's word, the Holy Bible. I want to thank you. I've been asked several times in the last couple of years, I've had people come to me afterwards and say, could you send me that map? Can you give me the map of that thing? I was like, well, you know, I got asked so many times. I put it on a QR code and I uploaded the map to a website. So if any of you want to get your own map of that, get your phone out now and you can get a picture of the QR code here. I'll leave it up for just a little bit. And so since you're recording this, all right, any of you, you'll be able to go back and watch it on the website. I'll be downloading it once I get back home. I did also make a QR code for another video presentation that I had, but we'll go back to this one to give anybody else a little more chance. If that doesn't work, visit the Arizona Origin Science Association website, find my email address link and click on that and you say, could you email me back the link to your map, should you want to do that? As I told a few people here, this was not a singular road trip that I took. This is a composite of different road trips I've taken over the years to go there. But I like to put together as if, you know, in theory, you could do this. I had somebody ask me, how long should I take? A month? I go, well, to really see everything, give yourself at least 2 weeks to really enjoy it. Otherwise, you're just rushing through everything. But it really helps to take your time and to enjoy it along the way. So we're going to start the question and answer session now. And what I usually get at this point